Welcome to Liberty Alert with Gregory Seltz, sponsored by our friends at the Lutheran Center for Religious Liberty here in Washington, D.C., a program that cuts through the chaos and confusion in the culture today by talking two-kingdom citizenship, bold biblical principles for a robust public Christian life. And now your host, Dr. Gregory Seltz.
Good day, Washington, D.C. I'm Gregory Seltz. Welcome to our program, The Liberty Alert, where every week we try to cut through the noise and take on the issues, especially the public issues that matter to people of faith. Today on our program, we've got the lead lawyer on the Boston flag case, the Shurtleff v. Boston case, Matt Staver of Liberty Counsel's founder and chairman. Matt, great to have you with us here today.
Good to be with you. Thank you.
And also, we have Tim Goeglein, Vice President of the Government Communications and Focus on the Family. Welcome again, Tim.
Thank you so much, Greg.
Matt, I know we don't have a whole lot of time with you today, so basically I want to just jump right in, get right to the case. Again, congratulations on the 9-0 victory. And I want to talk to our listeners, though, about the significance of this ruling, especially tell us why this case is so much more than Camp Constitution's right to fly a Christian flag in Boston.
Well, it's so much more than just a flag, because most people are not going to have this situation where you want to fly a flag on a flagpole. Mm-hmm. But here is what happened, and this is what makes the case so important. It's why there was so much intention to this. And if you go back to 2017, Hal Shurtleff, the founder of Camp Constitution, wanted to celebrate Constitution Day, which is a national recognized day of celebration, September 17 of each year. For 12 years prior to that, the city had created a forum for public gatherings and expressions, both on the City Hall Plaza out in front of the particular location of the City Hall, and also one of the flagpoles. And they said specifically in their policy for 12 years, they had been in operation, that the flagpole, in addition to the plaza, but the flagpoles also were open to the public. They were called a public forum, open to all applicants. Public forum is a very specific legal term, and everyone understands that, as that's the marketplace of ideas. That's where people congregate. They have different viewpoints that they can express. And open to all applicants is pretty commonly understood as open to all applicants.
All applicants, yeah, right.
And so for 12 years, it operated like that. They had 284 applications for private flag raising events, including people who wanted to promote communist China, and then others who were opposed to Mao Zedong and the revolution and opposed to the communist China regime. Those were obviously conflicting messages by individual groups. They allowed those for 12 years, 284 applications, no denials. Then Hal Shurtleff comes along in 2017. And here's where it becomes very important beyond the flag case.
Okay.
When the application used the word Christian in front of flag, that Hal wanted to fly a Christian flag at the same time that the ceremony was going on at the base of the flag for about an hour, celebrating the Judeo-Christian history, heritage of Boston, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and the founders. It was the one word Christian in association with the flag that caught their attention and caused the censorship. In fact, and this is why it's so important, they said the flag itself was okay to fly, just call it something other than Christian, call it Camp Constitution flag. Indeed, they had allowed a Bunker Hill flag for the Bunker Hill organization to fly.
Right.
It looks identical to the Christian flag, but it wasn't called a Christian flag. And they justified that by saying, well, that was a secular flag, even though the symbols and the pictorials on them are virtually the same. This one is also okay, just don't consider it Christian and we'll be fine. You can fly it. So it was clearly the Christian viewpoint as the reason why Hal Shurtleff's application was denied.
Wow.
If he named the flag something other than what it was, it would have been okay. But if he called it Christian, if that's the viewpoint, then it was banned. And that's what is the significance of this case. It means essentially now that with a 9-0 decision, government cannot censor Christian viewpoints from these public forum where other secular subject matters and viewpoints are permitted.
Yeah, and but what scares me too, and I know it does for you and our listeners as well, is they were basically saying, as a Christian citizen, you can't really be a Christian citizen in the public square. Even if you're a private citizen, even if this is your viewpoint, you can have all your symbols, you can have all these things as long as you don't define it as what it is. So be a Christian without really being one. And the government doesn't. Go ahead.
No, and indeed, and along those same lines, after the argument, I was outside speaking to the media, and when that was done, a person came to me. He migrated to America and is a U.S. citizen, but where he grew up, it was very anti-Christian. He says, if you confess Jesus as Lord and Savior, you would lose your head. You would be beheaded. If you denied him, you could live another day. Yeah. He said that's what they wanted Hal Shurtleff to do, is essentially deny Jesus, to deny the Christian component of this flag. And if you do, you can participate as a citizen. If you say that it's Christian, you're banned and punished.
Wow. Well, let me ask you this then. Is the court, well, first of all, 9-0 ruling, that's pretty amazing in and of itself in the court, the way it's situated today. Is the court finally putting the Lemon test, to rest and returning to the original intent of the First Amendment? Again, can you share the significance of what this case meant to Lemon? Because Lemon's always out there, and I don't think it's been totally repealed, but I think it's being gutted, is it not?
I think this case is another gutting of Lemon, because you have 9-0 and not a single justice used Lemon to justify the city's argument. There's no dissenters. And in fact, Justice Gorsuch, in his concurring opinion, noted that Lemon should be completely buried forever, and that none of the 9 justices even referred to the Lemon test. This is a 1971 decision that comes down from the U.S. Supreme Court. It has been the favorite weapon of people who oppose religious symbols, such as nativity scenes or religious speech. They have said, well, under the Lemon test, that's a violation of the so-called Establishment Clause, and therefore you can't have the religious symbol, you can't have the religious speech. And that has caused chaos since 1971. Justice Gorsuch, in his opinion, says no one relied upon it, so it's another indication that it's dead across all the justices. Mm-hmm. And moreover, he says that that was a bygone era where the justices were more freewheeling with the Constitution, and that era is gone. Now we're going to be more consistent with the original meaning of the Constitution. I think that was a very significant statement by Justice Gorsuch, but I think it's true. There's a majority of justices. And obviously, in this case, there's 9 justices who are ready to jettison Lemon, who don't think that it applies, and certainly it doesn't apply. And that's another good aspect of this case. I think it's another nail in the coffin of the terrible Lemon test that's haunted people for so many years.
Yeah, and it's
favorite weapon to censor.
Yeah, and it's made Christians just afraid to be Christian in the public square. And again, all we're saying is let us be a voice, let us contend for what our culture's to be, and let us be a voice like any other voice in the public square. Here's something I've always wanted to ask. Can you give me your legal opinion on this? Because whenever I hear the word religion, this is religious speech. Technically, we as Christians differentiate our faith, our proclamation that we think Jesus is the Savior of the world, from the moral teachings of the Bible. I always wonder why can't we be clearer about the fact that we're talking about moral speech, and all law is moral. I mean, all law is saying no to some particular action, which is a moral statement. There's not a lot of science behind some. In fact, science is almost amoral when it comes to what it says and what it does. Someone's got to come in and say, was that good or was that bad? And that's a different kind of question. I just wonder, is there a distinction? I mean, in your idea, when you start to hear this discussion, because we as Christians are saying these are moral teachings and they're culturally foundational to a lot of different cultures. Why aren't they foundational to ours anymore?
Well, I think they are foundational, really. And if you go back to the founders, and this is one of the things that would be emphasized, I had this event been able to go on for 1 hour, and that is the Judeo-Christian foundation of the Constitution, Declaration of Independence, our history and heritage, particularly Boston and the Commonwealth, John Quincy Adams, and so forth. Yeah. And for example, John Adams, the first vice president, second president, says our Constitution is not it's not going to work for any people except a religious and a moral people.
Right.
It only works for a religious and a moral people. Otherwise, it doesn't operate properly. Without religion, you have no morality. Without morality, you have chaos. And even George Washington, the first president, said that the twin pillars of the republic are religion and morality. the Northwest Ordinance, which we passed as we were expanding beyond the original 13 colonies. They wanted to make sure these new territories that were brought in, they would be consistent with the founding liberty principles that ultimately gave freedom and was the basis of the American Revolution. And so in the Northwest Ordinance, it says, religion, knowledge, and morality being necessary to good government and the happiness of mankind, schools and the means of education should be forever encouraged. What they're referring to is religion is foundational to our freedom. Right. And from religion, from what they're referring to as Christianity, forms the basis of a moral people. Right. And when you undermine those twin pillars of religion and morality, you're undermining the republic.
Yeah, and it just seems that people have conflated those two because our faith motivates us to serve in the public square, but we're talking there about common morals that even non-Christians might have with us, and we should be able to contend for those moral issues in the public square like anybody else. So, all right, well, again, as I said, congratulations for the 9-0 ruling. The first thing I want to ask you, did that surprise you? I mean, were you surprised that you got a 9-0 ruling?
Well, going into it, I didn't know if we would get a 9-0 ruling, but I thought we should get a 9-0 ruling because I felt that we had a strong, winnable case. Mm-hmm. After the oral argument, I actually told people that I don't usually predict the outcome after a Supreme Court oral argument, but in this mm-hmm. case, I predict that we win by a substantial majority. I think we could even possibly get a 9-0. However, I did not anticipate that Justice Breyer would actually be writing the opinion. But interestingly, during the oral argument, Justice Breyer asked the question, why did the city not settle this case? You know, if you're the city defending this, that's not the kind of question you want to have from Justice Breyer, whom you thought would have been on your side. Right. Justice Kagan also followed up that same question and asked the city, when you made a mistake, why didn't you just settle this and move on? So we had that question twice. At that point in time, I thought, well, it looks like Breyer and Kagan are on our side on this case. So I said we could possibly get a 9-0 decision. I just didn't think perhaps that Breyer would be the one writing it. I never thought, frankly, that I would have an opinion from Justice Breyer in favor of us on a religious free speech case of this kind of magnitude. But I think it shows you a changing of the court. Mm-hmm. And I think it shows you how out of touch these lower court judges really are with the Constitution, because we lost in the district court twice. We lost in the appellate court with 3 judges twice. So 4 judges before went the wrong way. Those individuals were very hostile to religion. I think now the nice thing about a 9-0 decision is that they cannot find solace in the shadow of some vociferous dissent. There is no one to take their side. And I think that, frankly, has silenced many of the worst critics that want to use the lemon test or some other version to censor religious viewpoints from the marketplace of ideas. It didn't work in this case, so that sends a very strong message going forward.
And can really quickly, Boston, it just seemed like you said, why didn't they settle this? Did they just dig in their heels? And then what was their argument that, well, we can discriminate against the Christian viewpoint?
Yeah, Boston dug their heels, and I thought it would be resolved early on, but they ignored our demand letter. They continued to censor it. I thought we would win at the district court. When they got their first win, I think it emboldened them. Mm-hmm. And they took the position that, yes, they unashamedly censored it because of this Christian viewpoint, the word Christian. So they didn't hide that. Then they said, well, you know what? It's really not a public forum open to all applicants, even though that's what we said. That's how we've operated for 12 years. It's our speech, government speech. We can censor and we can allow what we want to. The problem with that is, why would the government speak out of both sides of its mouth? Pro-China, anti-China, pro-Mao, anti-Mao, pro-communism, anti-communism, within the same week, every year around September, October. That just doesn't make sense. And so that was their argument, that we can literally reinterpret this policy so that everything that we allow, it's our version, and you have no marketplace ideas that are welcome. In fact, they essentially said, because we give you a hand crank to crank up and down the flag, that means we have control over the message. Well, that's like a custodian giving someone an after-school program room to use, and they use a key to unlock the door and let you in. So because they're unlocking the door or turning on the lights, then somehow that becomes a government speech program. The implications of this case were incredibly far-reaching if the court had gone the other way. Frankly, the implications if we had lost would be that we would be orphans to the First Amendment. We would no longer be welcome in these public fora across the country.
Wow. Well, and finally, then, just this question. I know about a minute left. What is the wide-ranging application in the positive sense? You just told us what it could have been. What's the wide-ranging application for our country? And I guess what's the good news for everybody, not just for Christians? I mean, people. This is a particularly Christian case, but what's the wide-ranging application for everybody's First Amendment rights?
The good news is that when you open up a forum, whether it's an after-school facility, whether it's a weekend place to rent for your church or a Bible club after school or a band shell with the place where you can perform in the public park or a community library meeting room, or in this case, a plaza or other places where people gather for expressive ideas, the government cannot pick and choose between viewpoints that it favors and viewpoints that it disfavors. In this case, it disfavored the Christian viewpoint and censored it. But in other situations, it may be a different viewpoint. The government has to remain neutral in that respect. And that's the beauty of the First Amendment. It allows the marketplace of ideas, conflicting viewpoints, to be able to have equal opportunity in the public fora of America. And that really is, I think, a critical component of this case, particularly with regards to Christian viewpoints, which is oftentimes the one that's censored. But it could also be political viewpoints that are censored. It could be pro-life viewpoints that are censored because somebody only wants a pro-abortion message, but you pro-lifers, you are not welcome here. Well, under this case, that is not permissible. That's a clear violation of the First Amendment.
Wow. Well, again, we love to contend for the truth because the truth is what finally sets us free. And I just thank you for your protection of that. Congratulations again on that. And again, keep up the good work at Liberty Counsel. Thanks again, Matt.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
All right. Take care. Wow, Tim, that was a great interview with Matt. I mean, what an incredible case, 9-0, and to see all the justices kind of stand for what to you and me has always been common sense. I mean, First Amendment common sense that religion is protected from the government, not vice versa. And the Christian moral world viewpoint is a positive cultural thing. If you don't know that, well, let us contend for it. Let us try to demonstrate for you. So I guess my first question to you is, we're seeing this criminalization of Christianity coming from some parts of our culture. And I don't think our people, even our Christian people that you and I know very well and serve, really see that. How have we gotten to the point where elected officials feel like discriminating against Christianity and even silencing it is going to be a good perspective? I mean, where is this coming from, do you think?
Well, first, I agree with you. And secondly, I think that Matt Staver and Liberty Counsel focus on the family, the Lutheran Center for Religious Liberty, but a number of faith-based groups, far beyond American Protestantism or Catholicism. I mean, even on the Supreme Court itself, we have Jews, we have Catholics, we have Protestants. So, I mean, it's very important to remember that this is not kind of a monolithic decision.
Right.
And I think that the answer to your question was beautifully summed up in Justice Kavanaugh's wonderful few sentences. He said, under the Constitution, a government may not treat religious persons, religious organizations, or religious speech as second class. And I think what Justice Kavanaugh de facto is saying is that Camp Constitution was treated as second class. I think that's what's happened only in some quadrants in America. I think the overwhelming majority of Americans of goodwill understand that Camp Constitution definitively had the constitutional right to fly the Christian flag in Boston. And they clearly did. That's what's so, I think, inspiring about a 9-0 ruling. But to your point, and the reason that we have to always remain vigilant is because, unfortunately, in some circles, people of faith are considered second class, or religious liberty protection is considered not paramount, but second class. And I think Justice Kavanaugh did a great job in that summary.
Yeah, and I think not only second class, I think it's becoming even more nefarious than that. It's considered dangerous speech. And that's what I think Christians need to understand. We need to contend for these truths because they are good, not only for us, but for everybody. These are God's truths, not ours. And I was talking to Matt about this. I said, is there a legal distinction between a moral perspective and a religious one? Because I think that's where this gets conflated. We're not trying to bring our proclamation of Christ and demand that government. We're not asking for any kind of favoritism there. But when we contend for these moral issues, a lot of these moral issues we share with other people who are not Christian. And so to be dismissed just because they brand it as religious speech is not only scary, but it shows how they can use words to actually push certain viewpoints out of the public square. But you also saw this in the pandemic. We were being told that the church was a second-class citizen there too, as well, right?
Yes. And, I was really struck in your wonderful conversation with him and in the second question that you asked, this idea about so many other groups being able to fly their flag. Right. Now, I think we have to take a step back and think about this. This whole idea, of flying flags began in 2005. Mm-hmm. It's Boston, for heaven's sake, the cradle of liberty. But think about this. Since 2005, there have been nearly 300 flag flyings. 300. Right. I didn't even remember 300 flags. And isn't it curious? Isn't it interesting that the flag that is singled out for denial is a quite elemental flag, not unlike the Red Cross itself, right. The organization. So the idea that under our First Amendment that somehow this free speech, or that all the other free speech or symbolism is protected, but not this free speech, I think is in many ways the heartening reason that it was a 9-0 decision. And I was really inspired by that conclusion.
I think, again, as Christians, we need to engage. I know this kind of engagement doesn't save. We're not preaching the salvation message of the gospel. We're preaching the preserving message of the scripture, which is more law-based and things like that. But, even things like liberty. People don't understand liberty is a biblical concept first before it was an American concept, or even I call it the differentiation, not separation, because that's got ominous terms to it. But even if somebody says separation of church and state, I usually say, I didn't know you were a Christian. They go, what are you talking about? I'm not Christian. I said, well, that's a Christian New Testament worldview, the differentiation of Caesar and God's work through Jesus and the church. They're both God's work, but they're differentiated. And I said, and both are to be honored. Well, that's the founding fathers' basis for the same kind of thing with the state and the church as legal institutions in America that have authority. And so you start to think about these things. We've got to contend for these, because if these fall away, if the foundations of you as a created person and by God who has unalienable rights, if that kind of things fall away, the state doesn't have a secular way of grounding those things except by just giving it to certain people that it likes. And that's usually seeds of tyranny. So again, do you think that Christians are ready to defend this isn't the saving message. This is the preserving message of God. But are they ready to defend those principles because they are good for everybody?
Yeah, I tend to be an inveterate optimist, but
yes, you are. I have to say that you are an inveterate optimist.
Yeah, I do think the answer to that is yes. But I want to go, if I may, because I love the spirit of your question. Mm-hmm. I want to go back to one of the all-time greatest books ever written in the history of man by Alexis Tocqueville.
Oh yeah,
his matchless book, Democracy in America. Now I'm quoting Tocqueville. He says, liberty cannot be established without morality, nor morality without faith. Now, this is Tocqueville observing our nation as an aristocratic Frenchman in the 1830s. But that single sentence observation sums up the following, to your very point, Greg, that it really doesn't matter at the end of the day what other people's applied opinions are to America then or now. What matters in real time is what happened. What was the actual case? And the answer to that is that America is a religious republic. Right. And it has been a religious republic from the day that it was founded. That's not to say that America, is a theocracy, or has an established church. We don't. Isn't it interesting? Thomas Jefferson only wrote one book. But the one book that he wrote was defending and defining religious liberty in the Commonwealth of Virginia, which eventually applied to the entire country. So I tend to be very optimistic, if I may say, going forward on the other religious liberty cases that you have so beautifully outlined on this program. The Coach Kennedy football case, we're still going to learn about the answer to that case this term, and the state of Maine case, where can taxpayer dollars be used to fund faith-based education, not to buy the crosses for the wall, not to buy the Bibles, not to buy any pamphlets for kind of evangelistic purposes, but can parents in a state like Maine dip into a pool of public money and apply it for a great education for their children? So I think not just do we have a 9-0 in the Boston flag case, Greg, I think we're heading toward a 100% win on all 4 religious liberty cases in this term.
Yeah, and even that last one you mentioned, that's an equal access thing to me. I mean, they have equal access to a basic education, and they shouldn't be shunned of the dollars that it takes to do that. You just brought up de Tocqueville, but I was just talking about him with in a previous meeting, and you said he's an aristocrat. When he came here, he was not. There's a lot about things about America he wasn't all that pleased with. It was a messy place. It wasn't aristocratic or anything like that. It wasn't what he was used to. So you would have thought he would have kind of bad-mouthed the place. That would have been probably the aristocrat's view of where America was at the time he was sojourning. But then to come up and say this particular thing, and this is what makes them special, you've got to take that as just data. That's just what he saw. And what was the quote you said? Don't take my word for it, but what was is that the Mark? Groucho Marx.
Yes, I love the quip from Groucho Marx. He said, "You can believe me, or you can believe my eyes." I think that's so well said. By the way, another person who was good at a quip was Ronald Reagan. And, I'm not sure that Ronald Reagan, Groucho Marx, and Alexis Tocqueville ever had dinner together. But Ronald Reagan made a very important observation. And he said that freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. And he said it must be fought for, protected, and handed on. And it seems to me that he was right then, and his words still ring true today, never more so than when we are talking about religious liberty and rights of conscience cases. These are the bedrock of the nation. If our First Amendment ever fails, then it's not America again, because the First Amendment is first for a reason.
Well, 9-0, what a great ruling in that sense. And it's more than just a flag. It was about whether your voice really can be protected in the public square. And 9 justices said, I think rightly and constitutionally, it is. Tim, thanks for being with me today.
A real pleasure and an honor as always. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in today. To get to know our LCRL DC work better, check out our website at lcrlfreedom.org. Till next time, God bless you always. I'm Gregory Seltz. Have a great week.
You've been listening to Liberty Alert with Dr. Gregory Seltz, Executive Director of the Lutheran Center for Religious Liberty in Washington, D.C. This program has been brought to you by the Lutheran Center for Religious Liberty.